Given how you grew up and your parents, your siblings, and then your own life, you got your commission in college,
right?
State University,
University of Rhode Island,
yep. And then spend your whole life working for the federal government, yep. and fighting its wars.
Yep.
What was it like to be called a traitor?
It was horrible. I mean, especially by the judge in a court that was being watched by the international media, and so yeah, it was a horrible experience. I'm not gonna kid you, but what I tell people and what I believe about myself. And my wife and I have been together since we were 13 years old, so that's another aspect of my life that carried the day for me. But if I was to give anybody counsel, and I used to do this for young officers or young enlisted soldiers, don't let anybody define who you are. You decide who you're going to be.
That's right.
You decide, what you're going to be, and you define yourself. And don't let the media define you. Don't let some boss define you. If you know who you are, if you look in the mirror at the beginning of the day and you turn away from the mirror and you're the same person, then you're doing pretty good. So I knew who I have been, who I was, and who I am. And so I just felt in my heart that the truth would eventually rise to the top, which it typically does. Sometimes it takes a while. I looked for weaknesses in the armor that was put in front of me over the course of the Mueller investigation. That included the court as well. And when I saw weakness, I took advantage and made some really, really difficult decisions. And thank God that I had my wife to make those decisions.
How much did you struggle with rage?
None really. I'm not a vindictive person. I mean, I'm probably more optimistic than a realist. I don't have hate in my heart. I just don't.
Man, if anyone deserves to. So the one point that we haven't touched on at all is the ideology that overlaid all of this. Yeah. So let me just simplify it, and you tell me if I'm wrong. So one thing you had in common with Trump, and you were not some Trump guy from the beginning, right, but you intersected in a couple of big beliefs. And one was that after 50 years of fighting this Cold War with the Soviet Union ended, and the new adversary on the horizon was so clearly China, and that we should pivot. And the federal government, which should spend a lot of money fighting Russia, should also pivot to focus on the new threat, China. Trump believed this. You believe this.
Firmly.
But the Obama administration did not believe this. Is this correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell me about your conversations with Obama officials about Russia and China.
Yeah, so first of all, Russia is they're a big nation state. They are nuclear power, but they're really declining. I mean, they are and they know this. And so Russia as an adversary, as I got further into my career, became less and less of an issue. And actually, to me, it was we needed to figure out ways that where we were operating globally, where the United States was operating globally, if we had mutual interests, we should at least figure out ways to work with them, not necessarily be in any kind of partnership with them. But clearly in the Middle East was a big deal, Syria particularly.
Right, if you have intersecting interests, why wouldn't you?
So China, what I started to see was this rise of China, and from my perspective, it really started about in the mid-90s. So I really started to really look hard at China from even after 9/11 and we were fighting over in the Middle East. My whole focus was on Chinese influence. And when we look at the Middle East, when we look at Central Asia, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, all the different parts, and then you talk about India, when you look at China's influence, I started to see this massive growth of Chinese influence overseas. And then at the turn of sort of in the middle of the Bush administration, I had a couple of key jobs there. I saw what the Chinese were doing right here in this country. And so fast forward.
What were they doing?
They were getting involved in our government structures. They were getting definitely involved in our education system. They were getting involved in Hollywood in a big way and in media. They were getting involved in real estate purchasing and just odd things like, and this is the way maybe it's the way my mind operates, but I would study different things because I was in a position most of my career where I had to be a bit flexible because I wasn't always just focused on somebody in South America. I had a sort of a global view because of the jobs that I was in with some of the airborne and the special operations that I was involved in. So I had a global view, and I really looked at the biggest adversary that we had, which was the rise of China. And I had studied...
Was it even close in your view?
Oh, what you mean as far as
compared to Russia?
Oh, not close at all. I mean, the rise of China is immense right now, and I'm very, very concerned about where we are with China. So back to your question about the administration. So as Trump and I were talking, we spent a lot of time talking about China, and he made a big deal about the trade agreements, and I was making a big deal about what the Chinese were doing in other aspects of our livelihoods here in this country and overseas. So as I begin to transition into the National Security Advisor position, so I'm the designee going in, and I didn't need to know too much about the Middle East or the war on terrorism. I had just spent years totally engaged in that, living and breathing that. That was not something that I was all that worried about. I was not worried about NATO or Russia and what was happening there because I felt confident that we had sufficient resources there. I was more concerned about what I saw China doing. And China, stealing technology. They're involved in they've been involved in our education system for the better part of 25 years, since the middle of the 90s, if not even sooner. And
can you back up and just unpack that a little bit? Yeah. How have they been involved in our education?
So since about the mid-90s, the Chinese have been sending students to our graduate and undergraduate programs across the country since the mid-90s to the tune of about 100,000 a year. So when you think about that, for 25 years, if you're sending 100,000 of your students, that number has fluctuated up. So it went to like 200,000, it went to 300,000. I think that there was a year where, if I remember what I had read correctly, it was even rose about 500,000 during the Obama administration, one particular year. And it was always on one-year visas, and then under the Obama administration went to two-year visas. So you have this population of students, and they're not studying liberal arts,
right.
They're not studying art, they're not getting art degrees.
It's not feminist poetry, no.
They're studying all of the key things, science, technology, engineering, math, all the STEM stuff, and they're taking it all, they're going right back to China, and then they're investing it. The Chinese Communist Party is now investing those students in whatever government programs they have, laboratories, the military, their intelligence, their industrial complex. And then when you start to see what they're doing here, because then I started to look, okay, well, what are they doing when they're here? And when they started to stay a year longer, I'm like, well, where are they going? What are they doing? What kind of jobs are they taking? So they're taking internships in the federal government. They're taking internships at the universities.
Chinese nationals are interning in the federal government?
They're taking jobs in laboratories because it's like we're going to open these doors up thinking that we're going to sell them on democracy when their government is a Chinese Communist Party, and their whole big picture in life for the 100-year plan of China, which I have read parts of it, and I would just say that 100-year plan is in effect, and it started under Mao Zedong when he took over in 1949, and their goal is by 2049 to be the global superpower. And I think that they saw over the last probably 3 decades that they could actually move that plan up even faster. Now, people are going to go, oh, Flynn's crazy. No, I'm not. I've read those documents. I know what's in those documents. And I know, and I've spoken to Chinese officers, actually, that have described what they feel and what they believe this century should be. So when America talks about, and you have had some great guests on. I'm a big fan of Victor Davis Hanson. When he talks about the 20th century, last century being the American century, right? World War I, World War II, we came out of it and we're the sole superpower, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now here we are, 20 years of war in the first 2 decades of this century. And China's sitting back and they are just continuing to grow and grow and grow. And when we spend, and I'll give you one hypothetical that's pretty close to the truth. When we spend, let's just say, $10 billion on a weapon system, and the Chinese government steal the blueprints, and spend $100 million on that same weapon system, who do you think's the smarter of the two, right? So we spend $10 billion in 10 years to build something. They steal the blueprints and they build it in a year. And now they make, copies of it, and they just keep making them. And that's in all kinds of armaments in the armament industry, and the weapon systems, planes, trains, automobiles, all these kinds of things. So the thing that people have to understand in our country, that American people have to understand, is when we put people into power in this country, and I'm way off your question now about what we talked about, but this is what we talked about when I transitioned into the White House. I wanted to know what were the policies that they had for China, and why did they have those policies? Because I want to understand, I want to learn something. If they had something that was in effect that I thought was good, we'll keep it. If there was something in effect that was off the mark, then we'll change it. But I wanted to make sure that I, for this country and for that president, for President Trump, that I was going to be focused on the right adversary, the right competitor, the right level of competition that we were going to have in the world. Because people need to understand that even though we have this great, great country called the United States of America under this beautiful constitutional republic, this beautiful experiment in democracy, there are countries around the world, namely the Chinese Communist Party, that thinks their ideology and their way of life is the better way to go. And so when you look around this country and you see what the Chinese influence is in this country today, it's in every aspect of our lives, every single aspect of our lives. And I think for one president who came in, like him or not, with his America First policies, it was really about resetting this sort of stage, this geopolitical, this geostrategic stage that exists that we are playing on right now. And I think that the previous administration to Trump, I think that they cowered to the Chinese. And I feel now, as we have fast forwarded to today and to this interview, and as I look at what is happening to our country today, I think the same thing is happening again. And I am very, very concerned that this is a time where I'm not certain if it's recoverable. I like to believe that it is, but the Chinese have learned extraordinary lessons from everything going back over the last 100 years, if not the last 30, and they are very shrewd and very smart as to how they apply pressure points and how they apply their timing to do certain things. Everything is very calculated, where in our country, you don't know what's going to happen by Saturday night. This administration's making decisions every day, and you're going, where did that come from? And it's not calculated, it's not well timed, and it's not in relationship to a long-term geostrategic political goal to keep this country, the top dog on the world stage for at least another, through at least my grandchildren's lifetime. Right?
No, it's to destroy the country, and they're doing it in very short order. So when you came in early 2017, January 2017, and you looked at what the last National Security Advisor had been focused on, and the federal government had been focused on internationally, how much of the money and the effort was focused on China versus Russia?
It was, they will tell you that China was at the top in terms of focus, but in terms of dollars, it was really, it's almost still dollars that were sort of under the old Soviet Union days, and now we're talking about 2015, 2016, 2017.
We were still fighting the Soviet Union.
So the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, and we're still operating on budgets and things that still had to do with Russia, right, and the Soviet Union. And I because we built, remember, from World War II until the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything was East against West, Russia against Soviet Union against the West, and the United States principally. And so every single structure that was built, I mentioned Eisenhower, the military-industrial complex, that entire thing was built to defeat or to fight the Soviet Union. So when you have this collapse and suddenly suddenly that threat goes away and it becomes something else. It morphs into something else. You would think that wise people, really smart people, they would begin to shift away and
they would readjust.
They would readjust. I mean, it's like I said earlier about organizations. You know, when something massive changes, you've got to change the structure in the organization and the focus. And that attraction, that addiction to the money was too powerful. I think it's too powerful.
What do you think Obama and Susan Rice thought of China? Think of China.
I think that they see them as a friendly nation that we can work with.
Do they believe, do you think, and the people, not just those two, but the people around them, the foreign policy establishment, do they believe that China is ascendant, is going to be the global superpower? Have they given up?
Yeah, I do. I think that they look at China as, I believe that they look at China as the principal competitor, but also ascendant this century, and that we have got to find ways to work with them. So when in fact, by 2050, let's say, because this is 2021, so in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, if we keep going the way that we're going, this will be the century for China. And China knows it. They've talked about it. They actually publicly talk about it.
Of course they do.
All their speeches, all their leaders, even President Xi. So I actually see this administration looking at China as going, saying, well, we're going to kind of play nice with them, and we're going to allow them to continue to do the things that they do. And I just put it into this perspective for you. If I was in the State Department, I might look at China as a diplomatic competitor. But as a military guy, I look at China, in my military upbringing, I look at China as an adversary. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, the last 48 hours now, they flew 52 sorties over the Taiwan air interdiction zone in violation of a whole bunch of treaties. And it's just to say, we can do this and you can't do anything about it, and we don't expect you, United States, to even signal that it's happening, because we feel like you're so apathetic and you're so weak right now in your decision-making ability inside the White House and inside of the government, where we're focused on all this crazy, these social issues instead of focusing on fighting and winning the nation's wars.
Do you think that China will invade Taiwan?
I believe right now that this is the highest level of threat against Taiwan that I have ever seen in my military experience and in my life, and I think in the lives of the people that are in my generation. Yes, I really do believe that the Chinese are just preparing the battlefield, so to speak, to basically take over Taiwan. And I really...
Will we do anything about that?
I honestly, I feel for the people of Taiwan, because, when you think about what happened in Hong Kong as an example. Remember 2020, the people of Hong Kong were waving American flags, and they're shouting for their freedom, because Hong Kong was supposed to be one country, two states, I believe is the right phrase, where Hong Kong was going to continue to be able to operate as a sort of as a banking system, as a free market society. No more. They are totally dominated by the Communist Party. Taiwan will end up being in the same predicament if China has its way. And I don't think China is going to allow themselves to go another couple of years and potentially lose the advantage that they have with a Biden administration right now.
So you think that at some point over the next 3 years, it's likely that China will invade Taiwan?
Yeah, I believe that China is preparing the invasion of Taiwan. They have been, and then lately their actions, their military actions, are such that now I really feel that's inevitable.
How will that's terrifying.
Yeah, it is terrifying.
How will our military respond?
Well, I think that our military's capabilities out in the Pacific, they're likely stronger than any other command and any other area of responsibility that we have. But we're not the military that we had. We don't have 5 aircraft carrier battle groups out in the Pacific, right? Like we had during the days of World War II at times. we're lucky to have a couple out there, and the Pacific is a big ocean, and the Chinese have grown in scale and scope and ability in an extraordinary manner in the last 20 years. The Chinese military is not to be messed with right now in terms of their sophistication and their intelligence collection ability. And frankly, the scarier thing for people like me, as I think about worst case scenarios in the case of a Chinese attack against Taiwan, is what they are able to do in this country. So the Chinese have an ability to do things inside of this country that could shut down our internet. They could, look at what we've learned from all of this, all of the COVID in the Wuhan lab stuff that we have learned, the gain of function stuff. When people say gain of function, that means you're weaponizing something. You're going to weaponize a capability. You're going to weaponize a bio type of thing, right? And so that's all known now. So is that part of some other aspect of what the Chinese long-term vision is? So I tell you that because we see things in increments of time that are so small, and the Chinese look at increments of time that are very, very strategic, and they look at decades and centuries when we're looking at days, and what's coming up this weekend.
I got to ask you, given that, and for our viewers who want more, you've spoken a lot about the rise of China, and I don't think it seems paranoid at all. I think it seems absolutely right. But I want to ask you about the debacle in Afghanistan and what that means for the rivalry between the United States and China. But first, I want you to watch the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff assess what we just saw in Afghanistan.
We absolutely missed the rapid 11-day collapse of the Afghan military and the collapse of their government. I think there was a lot of intelligence that clearly indicated that after we withdrew, that it was a likely outcome of a collapse of the military and a collapse of the government. Most of those intelligence assessments indicated that would occur late fall, perhaps early winter. Kabul might hold till next spring. It depends on when the intel assessment was written.
So I think everyone agrees it was a disaster, the way that we pulled out. And you have already said you're not a pro-war guy. You served there. Sadly. But the way that we pulled out was damaging to the United States. What effect do you think it has going forward on our rivalry with China?
Well, so first of all, it was shameful the way that this thing unraveled. We essentially surrendered to the Taliban. We retreated, and we left Americans behind enemy lines. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And there's still Americans, citizens that are in Afghanistan. So I was really, really irritated, beyond irritated as the way this thing unraveled. The big winner in Afghanistan is China, bar none.
How?
Because Afghanistan, for anybody that studied China and really deeply understands this Belt Road Initiative that they have, which is it's a means to resources basically to the west of China, right through the Central Asia Republic, through through into Europe and into Africa, into the Middle East, and it's basically accessing resources: food, water, and energy. Those are the three principal things that the Chinese are after. So when Afghanistan, it's like a big swinging gate. When Afghanistan was turned back over to the Taliban, and the Chinese government, they held on to all of their mining leases, so all of the mines that are in Afghanistan, copper, lithium. The Chinese held on to all of them throughout the last 20 years. So they walk right back in and they start those mines back up. So those are resources. The ability for China to not have to go too far to the north or too far to the south through Pakistan or through the Indian Ocean. I mean, these are big moving pieces. And so to have the gateway to Iran, and China and Iran are huge partners. China and Pakistan are huge partners. The Chinese and the Russians had one of the biggest trade and military agreements ever in their history only a couple of years ago. Actually under the Obama administration is when they signed those agreements. And so we have this sort of setting now in that part of the world where China is the dominant player from the Pacific Basin all the way to West Africa. And that's pretty much, you know, I can walk you through on a map where they're at and the bases that they've grown and the places where they're operating currently. So China is the big winner with this debacle in Afghanistan. The way that we exited Afghanistan, for all those, you know, those people that watch this show and all the people that had sons and daughters that served over there, my bigger concern is that the mothers and fathers of America, Tucker, will not encourage their sons and daughters to join our military.
That's for sure.
Because it's not because of the sergeants and the privates and the lieutenants and the captains that we have, because they're joining and they do their job and they're just great Americans. It's because of these leaders that are now showing their rear ends, and they're like, and you say, I couldn't live with myself if I was military. I would have said, look, I've screwed this up. I obviously didn't read the intelligence, or I did something wrong. So, you know, here's my stars. I'm going to resign. I mean, I just can't imagine. I can't imagine that level of leader not feeling, and for anybody in his position to say, well, I work for the president, and the president said he has every bit of confidence in me. Well, guess what? The American people probably don't. So I want the mothers and fathers of this country to believe that our military has incredible integrity, has an ability that, bar none, is the best that they're going to be. Their sons and daughters are going to be trained to the absolute best, and they're going to be led by the best people that we have in our society. And that's what's killing me right now. So here I am telling you that because I want moms and dads to still encourage their sons and daughters to join our military. But I'm telling you, it gets harder and harder for those moms and dads to say to their son or their 17 or 18-year-old son or daughter to say, yeah, go join the military after we just witnessed what we just witnessed. I mean, the 13 that were murdered by the Taliban, the 13 Marines, a sailor and a soldier that were murdered in that tragedy, the tragic attack at the gate of Kabul International Airfield. I mean, that was, I feel so bad for those young people because it was an avoidable death.
Yes.
And it's sad. So I mean, that's I feel bad about it, and I'm sick to my stomach because I do not want to say. In fact, I still encourage people to go join our military because I know the junior officers that are still there, and I know many of our non-commissioned officers, our sergeants. They're the best that we have in our society. I mean, this is the bread and butter of America, and